The fluorescent lights hummed in the empty corridors of Walker and
This deal
Associates
cannot
on the
fail.
42nd floor of the Madison Avenue Tower. It was past 8 p.m. on a Friday, and the only sound
about to
breaking the
lose everything.
silence was the rhythmic swish of a mop against Italian marble floors. Amelia Young moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had cleaned these same hallways for 15 years. Navy blue uniform, hair pulled back in a neat bun, hands roughened from years of work that most people in this building never noticed. She was invisible here. Just another piece of the infrastructure that kept the gleaming world of Manhattan real estate development running smoothly. She wrung out the mop, her mind already on the subway ride back to the South Bronx, on the leftover chicken she'd reheat for dinner, on whether Christopher had remembered to pay the electric bill like she'd asked. Her son was brilliant, had graduated top of his class from CUNY with a business degree, but opportunities for kids from their neighborhood didn't exactly fall from the sky. So he worked 2 jobs, saved every penny,
You're about to
and
lose
still
everything.
lived in the same cramped apartment where she'd raised him alone after his father died. Amelia pushed her cleaning cart toward the executive suite, David Walker's domain. She'd cleaned his office last, always had. There was something about the space that demanded respect, even empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, a desk that probably cost more than she made in a year, walls lined with photos of buildings he'd constructed across the city, monuments to ambition and success. She'd watched David Walker from a distance for 15 years, watched him build an empire after his father died in a construction accident, just like Christopher had lost his father. Different circumstances, different worlds, but grief was grief. She'd seen David transform from a driven young man into this hollow-eyed workaholic who lived in his office more than his penthouse. His daughter Harper sometimes visited, usually to ask for money. Amelia had overheard enough conversations to know that relationship was broken too. David had sacrificed everything for success, and now success was all he had left. Tonight, something felt different. Papers scattered across David's desk instead of filed away. Coffee cups left half empty, which never happened. The usually immaculate office looked like someone had left in a hurry, or perhaps hadn't left at all. Amelia was emptying the trash when she heard footsteps, heavy, quick. David Walker burst through the door, tie loosened, jacket off, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't even see her standing there. "I don't care what time it is in Singapore, Marcus," he was saying, voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I need those revised contracts now. The call with Wright is in 10 minutes, and without those documents." He stopped mid-sentence, listening. Then his face went pale. "What do you mean the file is corrupted? Marcus, this is a $380 million deal." He slammed his phone on the desk hard enough that Amelia jumped. He finally noticed her then, really noticed her for perhaps the first time in 15 years. "Mrs. Young," he said, and she was surprised he knew her name. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was still here." "Just finishing up, Mr. Walker. I can come back." "No, it's fine, I'm just—" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of pure desperation. "I'm in serious trouble." Amelia had worked for wealthy people long enough to know they rarely shared their problems with the cleaning staff. But something about the moment, about the raw fear in his eyes, made her pause. "The contract?" she asked quietly. David looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her as an actual human being for the first time. "The biggest deal of my career. Years of negotiation with Anthony Wright's investment group. We're supposed to finalize tonight, but my CFO—" He stopped himself, seemed to remember who he was talking to. "Sorry, not your problem." But Amelia had cleaned Joseph Hall's office too. Had seen the way he worked late recently, always on his personal laptop, always closing it quickly when anyone walked by. Had noticed expensive new watch, new car, had heard him on the phone once talking about when Walker is out of the picture. She'd worked in these buildings long enough to recognize corruption when she saw it. "Mr. Hall has been acting strange lately," she said carefully. David's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "Just I notice things. Part of being invisible. She set down her mop. He's been staying late but not working on company computers, and he seemed very interested in your schedule this week. David pulled out his phone, started scrolling frantically. That son of a... He looked up. He sabotaged the files. He's been planning this. His phone started ringing. The screen showed Anthony Wright. This was it, the call that would make or break everything. And David was standing there with nothing. No contracts, no documents, no way to close the deal that his entire company's future depended on. His hand was shaking as he reached for the phone. "Wait," Amelia heard herself say. "My son is downstairs, in the lobby. He's picking me up tonight." David stared at her. "I don't understand." "Christopher, he has a business degree. He's been reading everything about your company for years." She'd found the articles, the reports he'd printed out, studying Walker and Associates the way other kids studied sports teams. "He knows your projects better than most people who work here. Mrs. Young, I appreciate the thought, but this is a $380 million negotiation, and you have nothing to lose by letting him try." Amelia's voice was firm. "Answer the call. Put it on speaker. Let Christopher listen. What's the worst that happens? You fail the same way you're going to fail anyway?" The phone kept ringing. David looked at it, at her, at the empty office that represented 15 years of building something that was about to crumble. He pressed answer. "Anthony, good to hear from you." "David." Anthony Wright's voice filled the room, sharp and businesslike. "Let's talk about the final terms. I'm looking at the revised contracts now." "Actually, there's been a technical issue," David started, but Amelia was already moving. She ran to the door, threw it open, leaned over the railing overlooking the lobby 42 floors below. "Christopher!" Her voice echoed through the empty building. "Venaki, now!" She could see him look up, confused, then move toward the elevator. She turned back to David, who was stalling on the phone, talking about market projections, anything to buy time. The longest 2 minutes of Amelia's life. Then footsteps in the hallway. Christopher appeared in the doorway, 25 years old, wearing his security guard uniform from his night job, confusion written all over his face. "Mom, what's—" She grabbed his arm, pulled him into the office. David was still talking, still stalling. "Listen to me," she whispered urgently. "Everything you've studied about this company, everything you've learned, Mr. Walker needs help. Right now." Christopher's eyes widened as he saw David Walker, saw the phone on speaker, heard Anthony Wright's voice asking about specific contract terms. And something shifted in her son's face. The uncertainty disappeared. The young man who worked 2 dead-end jobs vanished. In his place stood someone Amelia had always known was there, but the world had never given a chance to see. Christopher straightened his shoulders, walked to David's desk, and said clearly, "Mr. Wright, this is Christopher Allen. I'll be handling the technical details of tonight's discussion. What's going to happen when a security guard from the Bronx has to save a $380 million deal? Comment, 'Keep going' if you want to see what Christopher does next, and subscribe because Chapter 2 is going to shock you." Anthony Wright's silence on the other end of the line stretched for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. David Walker's face had gone from desperate to utterly confused, his eyes darting between Amelia and this young man in a security guard uniform who had just inserted himself into the most important business call of the year. Christopher Allen stood behind David's desk, hands flat on the polished mahogany surface, leaning slightly forward in a posture that somehow communicated absolute confidence. Amelia recognized it. It was the same stance her late husband used to take when he was about to fix something everyone else said was unfixable. "Christopher Allen," Anthony Wright repeated slowly, his voice carrying the skepticism of a man who hadn't built a billion-dollar investment portfolio by trusting strangers. "I don't recall that name on any of the documentation I've received from Walker and Associates." "That's correct, sir," Christopher said, his voice steady, professional, stripped of the Bronx accent he usually carried. I'm consulting on the structural analysis of the Riverside Tower development, specifically the integration challenges between the residential and commercial zones you flagged in your preliminary review 3 weeks ago. Amelia's breath caught. How did he know about that? David's eyes widened. That issue had been confidential, discussed only in closed-door meetings with the senior team. Go on, Anthony said, and there was a new quality in his voice. Interest. Christopher reached across the desk and pulled up the architectural renders on David's computer screen, navigating the system like he'd been working there for years. Your concern was about the load-bearing modifications required for the luxury penthouses on floors 40 through 45. The original design had the weight distribution creating potential stress points that could compromise long-term structural integrity. That's exactly right, Anthony said. David, I thought we were still waiting on engineering solutions for that problem. David opened his mouth, but Christopher was already talking. We've redesigned the support column configuration. Instead of the traditional vertical load-bearing walls, we're implementing a hybrid system using post-tensioned concrete slabs combined with steel moment frames. It distributes the weight more evenly while actually creating more interior space in the penthouse units. Amelia watched her son transform before her eyes. This wasn't the kid who came home exhausted from double shifts. This was someone who had spent 5 years studying every technical document he could find about modern construction, who had taught himself architectural software on a laptop held together with duct tape, who had been preparing for an opportunity he'd never thought would come. The cost analysis, Anthony asked. Initial construction costs increase by approximately 12%, Christopher said without hesitation. But you recoup that within 18 months through 3 factors. Faster construction timeline because of the modular steel components, reduced insurance premiums due to superior earthquake and wind resistance ratings, and a conservative 15% price increase on the penthouse units because of the additional interior square footage. There was a pause. Then Anthony laughed. Actually laughed. Who the hell is this kid, David? David finally found his voice. Someone I should have hired a long time ago, apparently. The documentation you mentioned, Anthony said, and now his voice was all business again. I need to see those revised engineering reports, the post-tensioned specifications, the load calculations, the timeline projections. If what you're saying is accurate, this changes the entire risk assessment of the project. This was the moment where it could all fall apart, because Christopher didn't have any documents. He had knowledge, brilliance, and a photographic memory for everything he'd ever read about Walker & Associates projects. But he didn't have the actual engineering reports that Joseph Hall had sabotaged. Christopher looked at David, a silent question in his eyes. How far do we go? David looked back at this young man who had appeared out of nowhere, who somehow knew confidential details about a project he shouldn't have access to, who was currently saving David's entire company with nothing but knowledge and confidence. David nodded. Trust, a leap of faith. Mr. Wright, Christopher said, the full engineering documentation is being compiled as we speak, but I can walk you through the key calculations right now. Do you have the original structural plans in front of you? I do. Turn to page 47, section B4. You'll see the original column spacing at 6.2 meters. Now, if we reduce that to 4.8 meters and offset them by 30 degrees from the perpendicular, for the next 25 minutes, Christopher walked Anthony Wright through technical details that Amelia didn't fully understand, but could hear were impressive by the way Anthony's questions became more engaged, more specific, more excited. Her son was speaking the language of engineers and architects, of stress coefficients and thermal expansion ratios, of building codes and material science. And he was doing it from memory, from years of studying a company he admired, hoping someday, somehow, he might get a chance to be part of it. David had stopped looking confused. Now he was staring at Christopher with an expression Amelia recognized. It was the same look her late husband had when he found the apprentice who actually understood the craft. Recognition, respect. "Christopher," Anthony said when they finally paused, "I'm going to be honest with you. I came into this call ready to walk away from this deal. I've had concerns about Walker and Associates' technical capabilities for months. Too many projects, not enough attention to detail. But what you've just described, if you can actually deliver it, this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that makes me want to invest more, not less." "We can deliver it, sir," Christopher said. "I stake my reputation on it." "What exactly is your position at Walker and Associates?" Christopher hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He looked at David. This was the moment of truth. They could lie, could fabricate a title, could pretend Christopher had been part of the company all along, but David shook his head slightly. "No lies." "Mr. Wright," David said, stepping closer to the desk, "Christopher doesn't officially work for my company yet. His mother has worked here for 15 years as part of our cleaning staff. He's been studying our projects in his spare time while working 2 other jobs. Tonight, when my CFO sabotaged the documentation for this call, Christopher stepped in to help. And in 25 minutes, he's demonstrated more knowledge and innovative thinking than most people who've worked for me for years." The silence that followed was absolute. Amelia felt her heart hammering. She just watched her son's potential soar, and now it could come crashing down because of who he was, where he came from, what he didn't have on his resume. Then Anthony Wright laughed again, not politely, genuinely. "Well, I'll be damned. David, you've been holding out on me. This is exactly the kind of talent I want to see in companies I invest in. People who are hungry, who actually care, who study on their own time because they love the work, not because they're getting paid." "Does this mean—" David started. "This means I want those revised documents by Monday morning, and I want Christopher's name on them as lead technical consultant. Can you make that happen?" David looked at Christopher. "Can you?" Christopher straightened. "Give me the weekend and access to the engineering team. I'll have comprehensive documentation that will exceed every specification Mr. Wright requires." "Then we have a deal," Anthony said. $380 million, terms as previously discussed, pending final document review Monday morning. "David, I'll have my lawyers send over the preliminary agreements tonight." He paused. "And Christopher, I'm going to be watching your career. Don't disappoint me." "I won't, sir." The call ended. The office fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 42 floors below. David slowly sat down in his chair, looking like a man who'd just survived a car crash. Christopher stood there, still in his security guard uniform, visibly shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Amelia realized she was crying, quiet tears running down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. David stood up again, walked around the desk, and extended his hand to Christopher. "You just saved my company, possibly my life. I don't even know what to say." Christopher shook his hand. "You say when I start, sir, and what my salary is, because I just quit both my other jobs in my head about 15 minutes ago." David laughed, a sound of pure relief. "How does Monday morning sound? And we'll work out compensation that actually reflects what you're worth, not what someone with your resume typically gets." "That sounds perfect." David turned to Amelia. "Mrs. Young, Amelia, I owe you an apology. 15 years you've worked in this building and I never really saw you. Never asked about your life, your family, what you might need. That changes now, starting with the fact that your son is going to need an office, and you shouldn't be cleaning it." Amelia found her voice. "Mr. Walker, I'm proud of my work. I don't need—" "I know you are, but you also shouldn't have to work until 8 p.m. on a Friday while worrying about whether your brilliant son is going to get the opportunities he deserves." David walked to his desk, pulled out his phone. "I'm making a call to HR right now. As of Monday, you're head of facilities management for this building. Salary, benefits, normal hours. You'll supervise a team instead of pushing a mop. Mr. Walker, I don't have the qualifications. You have 15 years of knowing how this building works better than anyone else. That's qualification enough, he smiled. Besides, I have a feeling I'm going to be seeing a lot of your family around here. Might as well make it official. Christopher looked at his mother. Amelia looked at her son. Between them passed everything that didn't need to be said. Years of struggle, nights of worry, dreams that seemed impossible. And now, in one phone call, one moment of crazy faith, everything had changed. Thank you, Christopher said quietly. Both of you. Mom, for believing I could do this. Mr. Walker, for giving me the chance. David shook his head. Thank your mother for being brave enough to speak up. And thank yourself for being prepared when opportunity knocked. Most people wait their whole lives for a moment like this and aren't ready when it comes. You were ready. Christopher just went from security guard to saving a $380 million deal, but not everyone is happy about it. Chapter 3 shows you what happens when Joseph Hall finds out he's been caught. Drop A if you're hooked and subscribe, because this story is just getting started. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made Manhattan look like a postcard. Christopher Allen stood in front of the mirror in the tiny bathroom of the Bronx apartment he shared with his mother, adjusting a tie he'd bought yesterday at a discount store in Midtown. His hands were shaking slightly. "You look good, mijo," Amelia said from the doorway. She was already dressed in business casual clothes that still felt foreign on her body after 15 years of uniforms. Her new position started today, too. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Christopher said, tugging at the collar, like a kid wearing his father's clothes. Amelia walked over and fixed his tie properly. "You look like a professional, like someone who belongs in that building, because you do belong there, Christopher. You earned it." They took the subway together, the 6 train from Hunts Point to Grand Central, then walked the 6 blocks to Madison Avenue. The same route Amelia had taken for 15 years, but today it felt different. Today she wasn't arriving through the service entrance. Today she was walking through the front door beside her son, both of them heading to offices instead of supply closets. The lobby security guard, Marcus, did a double take when he saw them. "Chris, man, what are you doing in a suit? They promoting you from night shift?" "Something like that," Christopher said with a smile. "I'm working upstairs now." "No kidding. Good for you, man. About time someone recognized what you got." They rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. When the doors opened, the reception area was already buzzing with Monday morning energy. Charlotte Lewis, David Walker's executive secretary, sat at her desk like a guardian at the gates of power. She was a woman in her mid-40s who wore her authority like armor. Every hair perfectly in place, every accessory carefully chosen to communicate professional untouchability. She looked up when they approached, and her face went through a fascinating series of expressions. Confusion at seeing Amelia out of uniform, surprise at seeing Christopher at all, then something colder settling in when she understood they were here to stay. "Mrs. Young," Charlotte said with exaggerated politeness, "you seem to be lost. The service area is on the 3rd floor. "Not anymore," Amelia said calmly. "I'm the new facilities manager. Mr. Walker promoted me on Friday." Charlotte's perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin line. "I see. How unexpected. And you are." She turned to Christopher with barely concealed disdain. "Christopher Allen, I'm the new technical consultant. I believe Mr. Walker mentioned I'd be starting today. He mentioned something about a temporary arrangement." Charlotte emphasized the word temporary like a threat. "But I wasn't aware you'd actually be given office space. The building is quite full at the moment." "Charlotte." David Walker's voice cut through the tension. He emerged from the inner offices, coffee in hand, looking more relaxed than Amelia had seen him in years. "Good, you're both here. Christopher, your office is ready. Corner space on this floor next to the engineering team. Amelia, your office is 2 floors up. I'll have someone show you around after our morning meeting." Charlotte's face was a study in controlled outrage. "Mr. Walker, I wasn't informed that we were hiring. That's because I made the decision over the weekend. Christopher's hire is effective immediately, reporting directly to me. Amelia's promotion was processed through HR on Saturday. David smiled, but there was steel underneath. Is there a problem, Charlotte? Of course not, sir. I just like to be kept informed. Noted. Now, Christopher, we have the engineering team waiting in conference room A. They're eager to meet you and start on those documents right once by end of day. As they walked away, Amelia heard Charlotte mutter something under her breath. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. They had made an enemy. She'd worked with enough Charlotte Lewises to know the type. Women who'd clawed their way to positions of middling power and defended them viciously against anyone who might threaten their carefully constructed kingdoms. But Amelia had survived worse than mean girls in expensive suits. Conference room A held 6 people when Christopher and David entered. The engineering team, all men, all at least 10 years older than Christopher, all with impressive degrees from prestigious universities displayed on the office walls behind them. They looked up when Christopher walked in, and Amelia saw it happen in real time. The dismissal. The assumption that this young man in the discount suit couldn't possibly be the technical genius who'd impressed Anthony Wright. "Gentlemen," David said, "this is Christopher Allen, who'll be leading the Riverside Tower documentation project. Christopher, this is the team. Martin heads structural engineering. Peter is our lead architect. James handles mechanical systems. Robert covers electrical. Tom is responsible for materials science. And Dean manages our building code compliance." Handshakes all around, firm but perfunctory. Testing him. Martin spoke first. He was a man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the bearing of someone who'd been right so often he'd forgotten what being wrong felt like. "Christopher, we appreciate you stepping in on Friday. That was impressive improvisation, but now we need to actually produce documentation. Do you have formal engineering credentials?" "No, sir," Christopher said honestly. "I have a business degree from CUNY and 5 years of self-directed study in structural engineering, architectural design, and construction management." Peter, the architect, exchanged a look with Martin. "Self-directed study, I see. Well, this is a highly technical project requiring licensed professionals to sign off on all calculations. Perhaps you could assist in a support capacity while we handle the actual engineering." Christopher didn't rise to the bait. "Mr. Wright specifically requested that my name appear on the documents as lead technical consultant. Mr. Walker, is that correct?" "It is," David confirmed. "And before anyone questions Christopher's capabilities, I'd suggest you review the notes from Friday's call. He walked right through technical specifications that none of you had finalized yet, because we were still running the calculations," Martin said defensively. "You can't just make up engineering solutions on the spot." "I didn't make them up," Christopher said calmly. He walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room and picked up a marker. "The post-tensioned concrete slab solution I described uses a modified design based on the Burj Khalifa's structural system, adapted for our specific load requirements and scaled for a 45-story building instead of a 160-story tower." He started drawing, quickly, confidently, structural diagrams that showed the support column configuration, the tension cable patterns, the load distribution models. The room went quiet as they watched him work. "The original design had uniform column spacing at 6.2 meters, Christopher continued, still drawing. "But that created stress concentration at the corners of the building where wind loading is highest. By reducing spacing to 4.8 meters and offsetting by 30 degrees, we distribute both vertical gravity loads and lateral wind forces more evenly across the structure." Martin leaned forward, studying the diagrams. "The offset pattern would require custom formwork for every floor. That's expensive. 12% increase in initial costs, offset by faster construction time and premium pricing on completed units," Christopher said. The formwork is modular and reusable across floors 30 through 45. After the initial setup cost, it actually becomes more efficient than traditional methods. Peter stood up, walked to the board, studied the drawings more carefully. This is actually quite elegant. Where did you say you studied? I didn't study this formally. I read the engineering white papers from the Burj Khalifa project, downloaded the publicly available structural analysis, spent about 6 months teaching myself the calculation methods. Christopher turned to face them. Gentlemen, I understand your skepticism. I don't have the credentials you have, but I do have something else. I have 5 years of studying this company's projects because I wanted to work here so badly. I made it my full-time education, even while working 2 other jobs. He walked back to the table, pulled out a laptop that David had given him over the weekend. I've already started the documentation right once. I worked all weekend. What I need from you is verification of my calculations, licensed engineer signatures where required, and collaboration on the mechanical and electrical systems integration, because those aren't my strongest areas. He pulled up files on the laptop screen. Comprehensive engineering documents, professionally formatted, with detailed calculations and reference citations. 60 hours of work, compressed into a single weekend fueled by coffee and the terror of failing his first real opportunity. The room was silent. Then Dean, the building code compliance expert, spoke up. You've included updated seismic specifications for the 2024 New York City Building Code amendments. Those just went into effect last month. Yes, sir. I figured we should be ahead of compliance rather than scrambling to update later. Tom, the material scientist, was scrolling through the documents. Your concrete mixture specifications include recommendations for low-carbon alternatives. That's not standard practice. No, but it should be. The carbon footprint reduction is significant, and the structural performance is actually superior in high-load applications. I included cost comparisons from 3 suppliers who've already worked with Walker & Associates on previous projects. Martin removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he looked up at Christopher, the dismissiveness was gone. Son, I've been an engineer for 30 years. I've worked with graduates from MIT, Stanford, Columbia. What you've produced in a weekend would take most of them 2 weeks. If you're self-taught, then you're some kind of savant. I'm not a savant, Christopher said quietly. I'm just someone who finally got a chance to show what I can do. The meeting lasted 4 hours. What started as skepticism transformed into genuine collaboration. The engineering team found flaws in Christopher's work, places where his self-taught knowledge had gaps, but they also found innovations they'd never considered. By lunchtime, they were building on his ideas instead of questioning them. David watched from the back of the room, saying nothing, letting Christopher prove himself. And prove himself, he did. It was during the lunch break, when most of the team had gone to get food, that Joseph Hall made his appearance. The CFO walked into conference room A like he owned it, which until Friday he essentially had. Joseph was a man in his late 30s who wore expensive suits to disguise the fact that he'd never actually built anything in his life. He'd climbed the corporate ladder through politics and positioning, not through competence. David, Joseph said, ignoring Christopher entirely. We need to talk about the Riverside project. I've reviewed the weekend communications, and there seem to be some unauthorized changes. The changes were authorized by me, David said coldly. And the only unauthorized activity around here was you sabotaging files before the right call. Joseph's face went carefully neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? David stood up, walked around the table until he was facing Joseph directly. Corrupted files on the company server. Your personal laptop showing activity at exactly the time those files were deleted, and a very interesting pattern of large deposits in your personal accounts over the last 3 months. Christopher watched Joseph's face cycle through emotions. Denial, anger, calculation. The face of someone trying to determine if he could still talk his way out of this. You can't prove anything, Joseph finally said. Actually, I can. I had our IT security team working all weekend. They found everything. The sabotaged files, the offshore accounts, the communication with competitors who were very interested in seeing me fail on the right deal. David's voice was quiet, deadly. You're fired, Joseph. Security will escort you out within the hour. And if you try to fight this, I'll have criminal charges filed before you reach the elevator. Joseph's face flushed red. This is because of him, isn't it? He pointed at Christopher. Some kid from the Bronx shows up, and you're ready to throw away 15 years of my service. Your service? David's voice rose for the first time. You tried to destroy my company so you could sell it to the highest bidder. That's not service. That's betrayal. Joseph turned to Christopher, and the hatred in his eyes was pure poison. You think you've won something? You think they'll actually respect you here? You're a charity case, a token. The second you stop being useful, they'll throw you back to whatever ghetto you crawled out of. Christopher stood up slowly. He was younger than Joseph, taller, and after years of working physical jobs, considerably stronger. But he didn't raise his voice, didn't make threats, just looked at Joseph with something like pity. The difference between you and me, Mr. Hall, is that I earned my place here. You bought yours. And when you tear people down because of where they come from instead of what they can do, you've already lost. You just don't know it yet. Security arrived then. 2 large men who escorted Joseph out of the conference room while he continued to sputter threats and accusations. The door closed behind them, leaving David and Christopher alone. That was well handled, David said. I've dealt with worse, Christopher replied. You grow up where I did. You learn early that some people will always see your zip code before they see you, but their opinions don't change my work. My work speaks for itself. David nodded slowly. It does. And Christopher? It's saying good things. Christopher just made enemies, but he also proved he belongs. Chapter 4 shows what happens when high society meets South Bronx at David's daughter's charity gala. Comment if you're invested in this story. Subscribe because things are about to get complicated. The invitation arrived on Wednesday in a cream-colored envelope with Harper King's name embossed in gold. Harper King, formerly Harper Walker, David's daughter who'd taken her mother's maiden name after the divorce because it sounded better for her brand. She was hosting a charity gala on Saturday night. Black tie, Manhattan's elite. $1,000 a plate to benefit some art foundation that Christopher suspected helped more wealthy donors with tax write-offs than actual artists. You don't have to go, David said when he handed Christopher the invitation. They were in David's office, reviewing the final Riverside documents before submission to Anthony Wright. Harper can be difficult. Difficult how? David sighed, leaning back in his chair. My daughter and I have a complicated relationship. Her mother raised her to value appearances over substance. When my wife left, Harper chose sides. She sees me as the workaholic who destroyed the family. She's probably not wrong. But you want me there. Anthony Wright will be there. Several other potential investors, and after Friday's success, I'd like to introduce you around, show them that Walker & Associates is bringing in new talent. David paused. But I won't lie to you. Harper's friends are exactly the kind of people Joseph Hall was talking about. They'll see your background before they see your abilities. Christopher thought about declining. Thought about staying in his comfort zone, where his work could speak for itself, without having to navigate the social minefields of Manhattan high society. But then he thought about his mother, who'd spent 15 years being invisible to these same people, who'd walked through their world without ever being truly seen. I'll go, Christopher said, but I don't own a tuxedo. That's easily solved. David pulled out his phone. I know a tailor in Midtown. Tell him I sent you. He'll take care of everything. Saturday evening, Christopher stood in front of the same bathroom mirror where he'd adjusted his discount tie on Monday, but this time he was wearing a perfectly fitted tuxedo that probably cost more than 3 months of his old security guard salary. His mother had helped with the bow tie, her hands steady and sure. "You look like James Bond," she said with a smile. "I feel like an imposter." "Good. That means you're paying attention." Amelia straightened his lapels. "Mijo, these people are going to judge you. They're going to make assumptions. Let them. Then show them who you actually are. You've been doing that your whole life." The gala was being held at Cipriani on 42nd Street. Christopher arrived in a car service David had arranged, feeling increasingly out of place as he watched other guests arrive in limousines and luxury vehicles that cost more than houses. The men wore tuxedos with the casual confidence of people who attended these events weekly. The women wore gowns and jewelry that belonged in museums. Inside, the ballroom was transformed into something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers, floral arrangements the size of small trees, champagne flowing freely, and a string quartet playing something classical that Christopher couldn't identify. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and immediately felt like he was holding a prop in a play he didn't know the script for. "Christopher!" David's voice cut through the ambient noise. He approached with Anthony Wright beside him. "Glad you made it. Anthony, I believe you've spoken with Christopher, but you haven't met in person." Anthony Wright was shorter than Christopher expected, barely 5'8", but he had the presence of someone much larger. Late 50s, impeccably dressed, eyes that calculated the value of everything and everyone they landed on. "The engineering prodigy," Anthony said, shaking Christopher's hand with a grip that tested strength. "I've reviewed your weekend documentation. Impressive work, very impressive. Thank you, sir." "I did some research on you after our call," Anthony continued. "CUNY graduate, top of your class, worked your way through school, no family connections, no silver spoon. You built yourself from nothing. That's the kind of hunger I like to invest in." Before Christopher could respond, a woman's voice cut through the conversation like a knife through silk. "Daddy, you didn't tell me you were bringing employees to my event." Harper King approached with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent her life being the center of attention. 28 years old, blonde, beautiful in the way that required personal trainers and regular aesthetic treatments. She wore a red gown that probably cost more than Christopher's entire education, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. "Harper," David said with forced pleasantness. "This is Christopher Allen, our new technical consultant." "Christopher, my daughter Harper." Harper's eyes swept over Christopher with the kind of assessment that made him feel simultaneously invisible and overexposed. "Technical consultant. How utilitarian. And what exactly do you consult on?" "Structural engineering for high-rise development," Christopher said evenly. "I'm leading the technical documentation for the Riverside Tower project." "Oh, the project Daddy's been obsessing over for years." Harper sipped her champagne. "Tell me, Christopher, where did you study? MIT? Stanford?" "CUNY." The silence that followed was brief but loaded. Harper's smile sharpened. "How practical. Public education. There's something admirably democratic about that, isn't there?" Anthony Wright made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "Harper, some of the best engineers I know came from state schools. Turns out intelligence isn't limited to people who can afford Ivy League tuition." Of course not," Harper said smoothly. "I'm simply making conversation, getting to know Daddy's new friend." The word friend carried implications that made Christopher's jaw tighten. But before he could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Harper, darling, you simply must introduce me to your father's guest." The woman who glided over was older than Harper, mid-40s, wearing enough diamonds to finance a small country. Charlotte Lewis, looking significantly different than she did behind her reception desk. She was accompanied by two other women who might have been clones, all perfectly styled, all wearing expressions of polite predation. "Christopher Allen," Charlotte said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I didn't realize you'd be attending. How unexpected." "Mr. Walker invited me," Christopher said simply. "Of course he did. David does love his projects." Charlotte's pause before projects was deliberate, calculated to wound. "Tell us, Christopher, are you enjoying your first society event? It must be quite different from what you're used to." "It's certainly different," Christopher agreed. "Where I'm from, when people throw parties, they actually talk to each other instead of performing for each other." One of Charlotte's companions gasped slightly. Harper's eyes narrowed, but Anthony Wright laughed outright. "I like this kid," Anthony said to David. "He's got spine." "Which is exactly why I hired him," David replied, putting a supportive hand on Christopher's shoulder. "Christopher sees through bullshit better than anyone I've met. It's a useful quality in business." Harper's smile had frozen into something brittle. "Well, as charming as this is, I need to make the rounds. Christopher, do enjoy the evening. I'm sure you'll find it educational." She drifted away, her entourage following like pilot fish after a shark. Charlotte lingered a moment longer, leaning in close enough that Christopher could smell her expensive perfume. "A word of advice," she said quietly. "People like you don't last long in this world. You're a novelty right now, David's latest cause, but when the novelty wears off and you make your first real mistake, they'll send you back where you came from without a second thought." "Then I better not make mistakes," Christopher replied. Charlotte's laugh was cold. "Everyone makes mistakes, dear. The difference is when people like Harper make mistakes, they get second chances. When people like you make mistakes, you get forgotten." She walked away before Christopher could respond. David turned to him with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry. I knew Harper would be difficult, but Charlotte's behavior was out of line." "It's fine," Christopher said, though his hands were clenched tight enough that his knuckles had gone white. "I've heard worse. That doesn't make it acceptable." Anthony Wright was watching Christopher with interest. "How are you handling this, son?" "Honestly," Christopher took a breath, forced his hands to relax. "Mr. Wright, I grew up in the South Bronx. My father died when I was 7. My mother cleaned offices to put me through school. I worked security jobs and warehouse shifts to help pay rent. I've been underestimated my entire life by people who took one look at my address and decided they knew everything about me." He looked around the ballroom, at the wealth and privilege on casual display, at the people who'd never had to fight for anything because everything had been given to them. "These people," Christopher continued, "they don't scare me. They don't even offend me. Because at the end of the day, I know something they don't. I know that I earned everything I have, that every skill I possess came from years of work they can't imagine. And when I go home tonight, I'll know that I belong in that boardroom at Walker & Associates, not because someone gave me charity, but because I'm actually good at what I do." Anthony was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to Christopher. "That's my private number. When you're ready to stop being David's employee and start being your own boss, call me. I fund startups for people with your kind of hunger." Before Christopher could respond, Anthony was called away by another investor. David and Christopher stood there in the middle of the glittering ballroom, surrounded by wealth and hostility in equal measure. "You don't have to stay," David said quietly. "I'll understand if you want to leave." Christopher thought about it. Thought about the car service waiting outside, about the small apartment in the Bronx, about his mother who'd taught him that dignity wasn't about where you stood, but how you stood there. "No," he said finally, "I'm going to stay. I'm going to eat the expensive dinner, drink the expensive champagne, and make small talk with people who think I don't belong here. And then on Monday morning, I'm going to go to work and do my job better than any of them could do it." David smiled. "That's the spirit. Come on, I'll introduce you to some people who are actually worth talking to." The rest of the evening was a study in contrasts. There were people like Harper and Charlotte who treated Christopher like an interesting specimen in a zoo, something to observe and discuss, but never take seriously. There were others, mostly older business people like Anthony Wright, who were impressed by competence, regardless of pedigree. And there was one person who surprised him entirely. Her name was Abigail Scott, and she was David's corporate attorney. 50 years old, sharp-eyed, with an understated elegance that came from confidence rather than couture. She cornered Christopher near the end of the evening by the dessert table. "I wanted to introduce myself properly," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Abigail Scott. I handle all legal matters for Walker and Associates." "Christopher Allen, though I think you already knew that." "I did. I also know that you're the first person David has hired in 5 years without consulting me first." She smiled. "Normally that would concern me. But I reviewed the Riverside documentation. Whatever else you are, you're legitimately talented." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm here to warn you." Abigail's voice dropped lower. "Charlotte Lewis has been David's secretary for 12 years. She's also been trying to position herself as much more than that. When you showed up and David gave you direct access, office space, and his personal attention, you made yourself a target. I gathered that. It's worse than you think. Charlotte has allies. She collects information, trades favors, builds alliances. She's already spreading rumors that you and David have an inappropriate relationship, that you're manipulating him, that you're after his money." Abigail paused. "And Harper is feeding those rumors because she resents any attention David gives to anyone else." Christopher felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of rumors? The kind that destroy careers. The kind that make investors nervous. The kind that make board members ask questions. Abigail met his eyes directly. "I'm telling you this because I believe in competence over politics. You're good at your job, but being good isn't enough in this world. You need to be careful. Document everything. Keep your interactions with David professional. Don't give them ammunition." "I appreciate the warning." "One more thing." Abigail glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Joseph Hall is threatening to sue for wrongful termination. He's claiming David fired him to cover up financial irregularities that Joseph was about to expose. It's nonsense, but it's the kind of nonsense that gets attention. And he's planning to drag you into it, claim you were planted to push him out. That's insane. That's litigation." Abigail handed him her card. "If anyone contacts you, anyone at all, about the Hall situation or about David or about anything related to Walker and Associates, you call me immediately. Don't answer questions. Don't try to defend yourself. Just call me. Understood?" Christopher took the card. "Understood." Abigail smiled, warmer this time. "Good. Now go home, get some rest, and remember that Monday morning you still have a job to do. Everything else is just noise." She walked away, leaving Christopher standing alone by the dessert table, suddenly aware of how exhausting the evening had been. The constant performance, the endless judgment, the feeling of being perpetually on trial. This was David's world, Harper's world, Charlotte's world, but it didn't have to be his. Christopher found David near the exit, saying goodbye to other guests. "I think I'm going to head out." "Smart choice. These things have a way of dragging on forever." David walked him outside, where the car service was waiting. "Christopher, I know tonight was difficult. Harper was worse than usual, Charlotte was openly hostile, and you spent the evening being judged by people who couldn't do your job in a million years. It's fine. It's not fine, but it is reality. This is the world that comes with success, the politics, the performance, the people who will try to tear you down because you're threatening their position." David paused. "The question is whether you can handle it. Because the work, the actual engineering and design and problem solving, that's the easy part. The hard part is everything else." Christopher thought about his conversation with Abigail, about Charlotte's warnings, about Harper's casual cruelty, thought about going back to the Bronx apartment where his mother was probably waiting up, wanting to hear about the gala, proud of her son who'd been invited to Manhattan high society. "I can handle it," Christopher said finally, "because at the end of the day, I'm not here for them. I'm here for the work, for the buildings we're going to design and construct, for the problems we're going to solve. Everything else really is just noise." David smiled. "Then I'll see you Monday morning." We have a meeting with Anthony Wright at 9 to finalize the Riverside contract. Dress professionally, but not as formal as tonight. This time, we're there to work, not perform." Christopher got into the car, watching through the window as David walked back into the building where the gala was still continuing, where Harper and Charlotte and all the others were still performing their elaborate social dances, still jockeying for position, still playing games that Christopher wanted no part of. The car pulled away from Cipriani, heading north toward the Bronx, toward home, toward reality. Monday morning, he'd be back at Walker & Associates, back in the conference room with the engineering team, back to doing work that mattered, creating things that would outlast all the social politics and petty cruelties of Manhattan high society. Back to being Christopher Allen, not David Walker's charity case or Harper's target or Charlotte's threat. Just Christopher, doing what he did best. Building something real. The gala exposed the enemies Christopher has made, but Monday brings the biggest test yet. Chapter 5 reveals what happens when Anthony Wright makes an offer that could change everything. Comment if you're still with this story, and subscribe because we're heading toward the finale. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of October day that made New Yorkers remember why they tolerated the brutal winters. Christopher was at his desk by 7 a.m., reviewing the final Riverside documentation one more time before the 9 o'clock meeting with Anthony Wright. Every calculation checked, every specification verified, every risk assessment documented. His office was still surreal, corner space with windows overlooking Madison Avenue, a desk that actually fit a computer and workspace, walls where he could eventually hang his own credentials once he earned them. It had been less than a week since he'd answered that phone call, and his entire life had transformed. There was a knock on his doorframe. Amelia stood there with 2 coffees from the building's cafe, the good coffee that cost $6 a cup instead of the $1.50 bodega coffee they usually drank. "Thought you could use this," she said, handing him one. "Big day." "Thanks, Mom." Christopher took a grateful sip. "How's your first week going?" "Strange." Amelia sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where last week she would have been emptying his trash can. "The people I used to clean for now report to me. Some of them are adjusting better than others. Let me guess, Charlotte's giving you trouble?" "Charlotte's giving everyone trouble, but especially me." Amelia's voice was calm, but Christopher could hear the undercurrent of frustration. "She keeps finding reasons to call me to her floor. Spills that need immediate attention. Issues with the bathrooms that somehow only I can address, making sure I remember where I came from." Christopher felt anger flash through him. "That's harassment. You should report her." "To who, David? He has enough problems without adding a feud between his secretary and his facilities manager." Amelia shook her head. "Mijo, this is what I was trying to prepare you for. People like Charlotte don't like it when the world doesn't stay in the boxes they've built. We're supposed to stay invisible. When we become visible, when we take up space, they'll do everything they can to push us back down. So what do? We keep showing up. We keep doing excellent work. We don't give them excuses to tear us down." Amelia smiled. "And we remember that their opinions don't define us. Our work does." Udrchi. At 8:45, Christopher gathered his materials and headed to the main conference room. The engineering team was already there, along with David and Abigail Scott. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation. Anthony Wright's investment would secure not just the Riverside project, but the company's expansion plans for the next 5 years. Anthony arrived exactly at 9, accompanied by 2 associates carrying briefcases full of contracts and due diligence documents. He shook hands with David, nodded to the engineering team, and stopped when he reached Christopher. "The man of the hour," Anthony said. "Ready to defend your work?" "Always, sir." What followed was 3 hours of intense technical review. Anthony's associates went through every calculation, every specification, every risk assessment with the thorough precision of people who invested hundreds of millions of dollars and couldn't afford mistakes. They challenged assumptions, questioned methodologies, probed for weaknesses in the design. Christopher handled it all. When they questioned the post-tensioned concrete specifications, he walked them through the material science showing superior performance under cyclic loading. When they challenged the cost projections, he pulled up vendor quotes and historical data from similar projects. When they expressed concern about the accelerated timeline, he explained the modular construction approach that would reduce on-site assembly time by 30%. By noon, Anthony's associates were running out of questions. They conferred quietly in the corner while David, Christopher, and the team waited. Finally, Anthony stood up. "Gentlemen, I've reviewed hundreds of development projects. This is the most thoroughly documented, innovatively designed proposal I've seen in years. Christopher, your team has done exceptional work." Christopher started to relax, started to believe this was actually happening. Then Anthony continued, "Which is why I'm making a different offer than the one we discussed." The room went very quiet. David's face remained neutral, but Christopher could see tension in his shoulders. "I don't want to just invest in the Riverside project," Anthony said. "I want to invest in Christopher." Christopher blinked. "Sir, you're wasted as a consultant, even a highly paid one. You should be running your own firm, making your own decisions, building your own legacy." Anthony pulled out a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table to Christopher. "I'm offering to fund a startup. Allen Engineering, 20 million in seed capital. You bring the technical brilliance. I bring the business infrastructure and client connections. We split ownership 60-40, with you holding the majority stake." The silence in the room was absolute. Christopher stared at the folder like it might explode. David spoke carefully. "Anthony, Christopher just started here a week ago." "Exactly. A week ago he was working security. Now he's saved your biggest deal and designed a project that my entire team can't find flaws in. Imagine what he could do with proper resources and time." Anthony looked at Christopher. "This is a one-time offer. I'm flying to Singapore tomorrow and won't be back for 6 weeks. You have until end of business today to decide." Christopher's mind was racing. $20 million, his own firm, the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime, if it came at all. But he looked at David, who had given him his first real chance, at the engineering team, who had accepted him despite their initial skepticism, at the office down the hall, where his mother was finally being seen as more than invisible help. "Mr. Right," Christopher said slowly. "Can I have a few hours to think about this?" "Of course. I'll be at the St. Regis until 5 p.m. Call my assistant when you're ready to discuss." Anthony stood, shook hands again. "Whatever you decide, Christopher, you have a brilliant future ahead of you. The only question is whether you build it under someone else's name or your own." After Anthony left, the conference room remained silent. The engineering team filed out quietly, knowing this was a conversation Christopher needed to have with David alone. Even Abigail excused herself, though she squeezed Christopher's shoulder supportively on her way out. Finally, it was just David and Christopher. "You should take it," David said. Christopher looked up, surprised. "What?" "Anthony's right. You're extraordinary, Christopher. You deserve to build something of your own, not just contribute to something I built." David walked to the window, looking out at Manhattan. "I hired you because you saved my company. But keeping you here just because I got to you first would be selfish. You gave me a chance when no one else would. I gave you a job. Anthony's offering you a future." David turned back. "Christopher, I've spent my entire life building Walker & Associates, sacrificed my marriage, my relationship with my daughter, everything personal for professional success. And you know what I learned? Buildings are impressive, but they're not legacy. People are legacy. The impact you have on others, the opportunities you create, the lives you change, that's what actually matters. So, you're saying I should leave? I'm saying you should make the decision that's right for you, not the decision you think you owe me." David sat down across from Christopher. "If you stay, you'll have a great career here. Good salary, interesting projects, my full support. But you'll always be working for someone else, building someone else's vision. And if you go, you'll have the chance to build something entirely your own. Make your own decisions, take your own risks, create your own legacy." David smiled. "And you'll probably fail a dozen times before you succeed. That's what entrepreneurship is. But those failures will teach you more than any safe position ever could." Christopher thought about his father, who had died on a construction site working for someone else's company, who had dreamed of starting his own business, but never had the capital or connections to make it happen, who had told 7-year-old Christopher that the key to life wasn't working hard, it was working smart, building assets, not just earning wages. "What would you do?" Christopher asked. "If you were me?" David laughed. "When I was your age, I turned down a safe job at a major firm to start Walker & Associates with nothing but a loan and a prayer. It was terrifying and stupid and the best decision I ever made." He paused. "But that was my decision. This is yours. And there's no wrong answer, Christopher. Either path leads somewhere worth going." Christopher picked up the folder Anthony had left. Inside was a term sheet, financial projections, a proposed organizational structure. Everything professionally prepared, ready to execute. $20 million of belief in his potential. "Can I ask you something?" Christopher said. "Anything. Do you think I'm ready, honestly?" David was quiet for a long moment. "Ready? No. Nobody's ever fully ready for something like this. You'll make mistakes. You'll face challenges you can't anticipate. You'll have moments where you question everything." He leaned forward. "But will you figure it out? Will you work harder than anyone else to make it succeed? Will you bring the same intelligence and integrity to your own company that you brought to mine?" "Absolutely. And that's what actually matters." Christopher stood up, walked to the same window David had been looking through. 42 floors below, Manhattan moved with its usual frenetic energy. Millions of people pursuing millions of dreams, most of which would never materialize, but some would. Some people would take crazy risks and build something real. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. "How did the meeting go?" He typed back, "Complicated. Can you come to my office when you have a minute?" 3 minutes later, Amelia knocked on his door. Christopher showed her the folder, explained Anthony's offer, watched her face cycle through shock and pride and concern. $20 million, she said softly. "Mijo, that's terrifying," Christopher finished. "Mom, a week ago I was working security. Now someone wants to give me $20 million to start a company. What if I fail? What if I take that money and waste it? What if I'm not actually as good as they think I am?" Amelia sat down, pulled Christopher into the chair beside her. "Do you remember when you were 12 and you wanted to enter that science competition? You spent 6 months building that bridge model, testing load capacities, calculating stress points. And the night before the competition, you wanted to quit because you were afraid it wasn't good enough," Christopher remembered. He'd been convinced his project was garbage compared to the kids from the private schools with their expensive materials and professional help. "I told you then what I'm telling you now," Amelia continued. "Fear of failure is just proof that you care about succeeding. The kids who never feel that fear are the ones who've never tried anything difficult. But you've been preparing for this moment your entire life, even when you didn't know what this moment would look like. What if I let everyone down? What if you don't?" Amelia smiled. "Christopher, your father died building someone else's dream. You have a chance to build your own. That's not something to be afraid of. That's something to be grateful for." Christopher looked at his mother, this woman who had cleaned offices for 15 years so he could get an education, who had worked double shifts so he wouldn't have to choose between school and helping with rent, who had never once made him feel like her sacrifices were his burden to carry. "If I do this," he said slowly, "I want you to be part of it. Not just as my mum, as part of the company, head of operations or something, A real position with real authority. Mijo, I don't have those kinds of qualifications. Neither do I, technically. But we're both smart enough to learn, we're both hard workers, and we're both tired of other people deciding what we're capable of. Christopher took her hand. If I'm going to build something, I want to build it with you. Deal? Amelia's eyes filled with tears. Deal. At 4:30 p.m., Christopher called Anthony Wright's assistant and arranged to meet at the St. Regis at 5. He spent the intervening time with David, discussing logistics, transition plans, how to ensure the Riverside project continued smoothly even after Christopher left. "You're sure about this?" David asked one more time. "No," Christopher admitted. "But I'm sure I need to try, and I'm sure that if I stay here because it's safe and comfortable, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. Then go build something amazing. And when you need a reference or advice or just someone who understands what it's like to risk everything on a dream, call me." They shook hands, but David pulled him into an embrace. "Your father would be proud of you, Christopher. I know I barely knew you a week ago, but I'm proud of you too." At the St. Regis, Anthony Wright was waiting in a private meeting room with his lawyers and accountants. The term sheet was revised, signed, executed. $20 million transferred into an account Christopher had opened that afternoon. Allen Engineering became a real entity, legally incorporated, ready to operate. "Welcome to entrepreneurship," Anthony said, shaking Christopher's hand one final time. "Now the real work begins." Christopher left the hotel as the sun was setting, painting Manhattan in shades of gold and orange. He walked instead of taking the subway, needing time to process what had just happened. In 1 week, he'd gone from security guard to technical consultant to CEO of his own firm. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was exactly what he was meant to do. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Christopher Allen." A woman's voice, professional, cold. "Yes?" "This is Jennifer Martinez from the New York Business Journal. I'm working on a story about Walker and Associates and allegations of financial impropriety. Joseph Hall claims you were involved in covering up fraudulent accounting practices. Would you care to comment?" Christopher's heart sank. Joseph Hall, making good on his threats, trying to drag Christopher down with him. He remembered Abigail Scott's advice. "Don't answer questions, just call me." "No comment," Christopher said. "Direct all inquiries to Abigail Scott at Walker and Associates Legal Department." He hung up, immediately called Abigail, explained the situation, heard her curse softly. "This is going to get messy," she said. "Hall's playing dirty, trying to create doubt about David's judgment in hiring you, making investors nervous. It's a common tactic in wrongful termination cases." "What do I do?" "Nothing. You say nothing, you post nothing, you engage with no reporters or investigators without me present. Let me handle this." She paused. "Christopher, congratulations on the Anthony Wright deal. I heard you're starting your own firm. That's incredible. But timing-wise, this couldn't be worse. Hall's going to spin your departure as proof you were involved in something shady. Why would he leave so quickly unless he was trying to escape scrutiny? That's insane. That's litigation. Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." Christopher finally made it home to the Bronx after 9 p.m. The apartment felt smaller than ever, but also more precious. This was real. The penthouse offices and Manhattan galas were performance. This cramped space where his mother was making chicken and rice in the kitchen, where his childhood drawings still hung on the refrigerator, where the radiator clanked and the neighbors argued through thin walls. This was home. "You okay, Mijo?" Amelia asked, seeing his face. "Joseph Hall is trying to destroy me, says I was involved in covering up fraud." "Were you?" "Of course not. Then the truth will come out." Amelia served him a plate. "Eat. Whatever battles come tomorrow, you face them with a full stomach." They ate together in comfortable silence, and Christopher felt his anxiety settle. Whatever happened next Whatever attacks Joseph Hall launched, whatever challenges came with running his own company, he wouldn't face them alone. He had his mother, he had David's support, he had Anthony's investment, and most importantly, he had himself. The skills he'd built, the knowledge he'd earned, the integrity he'd maintained even when taking shortcuts would have been easier. Tomorrow, Allen Engineering would open for business. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, Christopher Allen sat in his small Bronx apartment, eating his mother's cooking, and allowed himself one moment of pure gratitude for how far they'd come. From invisible to impossible to inevitable. One phone call had started it all. Now it was time to see where it would lead. Christopher's new beginning is already under attack, and the final chapter will determine if his gamble pays off or destroys everything he's built. Chapter 6 brings this story home. Comment if you're ready for the conclusion, and make sure you're subscribed because the ending is going to be worth it. 3 months later, Christopher stood in front of floor-to-ceiling windows in Allen Engineering's temporary office space in Long Island City. It wasn't Manhattan, it wasn't glamorous, but it was his. 2,500 square feet of raw possibility, 3 full-time engineers he'd hired away from larger firms, and a conference room where they'd just landed their second major client. The New York Business Journal article about Joseph Hall's allegations had run 6 weeks earlier. It had been brutal. Insinuations about Christopher's rapid rise, questions about David Walker's judgment, suggestions of financial irregularities that conveniently overlooked the fact that Joseph himself was under federal investigation for embezzlement. The article had cost Allen Engineering 2 potential clients who got cold feet about associating with controversy. It had generated threatening emails from strangers who believed everything they read. It had made Christopher's mother cry when a neighbor showed her the article with barely concealed glee at watching someone who'd risen too fast get taken down. But it hadn't broken them. Abigail Scott had handled the legal response with surgical precision, court filings that methodically demolished every one of Joseph's claims, depositions where Joseph's story fell apart under questioning, financial forensics that showed the only fraud committed was Joseph's own systematic theft of company funds. 2 weeks ago, Joseph Hall had dropped his lawsuit and accepted a plea deal on the embezzlement charges. 3 years in federal prison, full restitution to Walker and Associates, and a permanent ban from serving as an officer in any publicly traded company. The Journal had run a tiny correction on page 23. No apology to Christopher. No acknowledgement of the damage their original story had caused. Just a brief note that allegations against Christopher Allen were unfounded. But the work spoke for itself. Allen Engineering had completed the technical documentation for Riverside Tower ahead of schedule and under budget. They'd been hired by Anthony Wright's group to consult on 2 additional projects. And yesterday, they'd signed a contract with a developer in Chicago for a mixed-use high-rise that would be their first fully independent project from concept to completion. Christopher's phone buzzed. A text from David Walker. "Turn on NY1, now." He grabbed the remote, switched on the TV mounted in the conference room. NY1 was showing a press conference. Harper King stood at a podium, looking subdued in ways Christopher had never seen her. Behind her stood David, Abigail Scott, and representatives from several major charitable organizations. "I'm here today to announce a new initiative," Harper was saying, her voice missing its usual performative quality. The Walker King Foundation will be partnering with community organizations across New York City to create educational opportunities for young people from underserved neighborhoods who show exceptional promise but lack access to traditional pathways for success. The camera cut to David, who stepped forward. "My daughter and I have spent the past 3 months discussing what real philanthropy looks like. Not galas and tax write-offs, but actual investment in human potential. We were inspired by someone who showed us that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. We're calling it the Christopher Allen Scholarship Program, Harper continued, and Christopher almost dropped the remote. Full tuition, mentorship, internship placements, and professional development for 50 students per year from public schools across the 5 boroughs. We're starting with students interested in STEM fields, but we'll expand to other disciplines as the program grows. The press conference continued, but Christopher couldn't hear it over the ringing in his ears. They'd named a scholarship program after him. Harper King, who had treated him like garbage at that gala 3 months ago, was now standing in front of cameras announcing a program bearing his name. His office door opened. Amelia walked in, tears streaming down her face. She'd seen it too. "Mijo," she said, pulling him into an embrace. "Your father would be so proud. I'm so proud." Christopher's phone rang. "David, did you know about this?" Christopher asked. Harper wanted it to be a surprise. "She's been different since—" David paused. "Since you showed both of us what real character looks like. She called me 6 weeks ago, asked if we could talk, really talk, for the first time in years. Told me she'd been watching how you handled the Joseph Hall situation. No public complaints, no angry social media posts, just quiet dignity and good work. She said it made her realize how much of her own life was performance instead of substance." "David, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep being proof that the system doesn't have to stay broken. That talent and hard work actually can overcome barriers if someone gives them a chance." David's voice was warm. "Oh, and speaking of chances, I have someone here who wants to talk to you." There was a rustling sound. Then a different voice came on the line. Young, nervous, trying to sound confident. "Mr. Allen, this is Marcus Rodriguez. I'm 17, I go to Bronx Science, and I just found out I'm one of the first recipients of your scholarship. I wanted to say thank you. You're basically my hero, man." Christopher had to sit down. "Marcus, I'm nobody's hero. I just got lucky. That's not what my guidance counselor says. She says luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. She says you spent 5 years preparing, and when that phone call happened, you were ready." Marcus paused. "I want to be ready too. When my opportunity comes. That's why this scholarship matters so much. It's not just money, it's someone believing I can do it." They talked for 10 more minutes. Christopher learned that Marcus wanted to study civil engineering, that his father worked construction just like Christopher's had, that he'd been studying architectural design on YouTube because his school didn't have advanced courses, that he'd almost given up on college because the cost seemed impossible. When the call ended, Christopher sat in silence for a long moment. Amelia waited, knowing he needed to process. "I didn't do anything special," he finally said. "I just answered a phone call." "No, mijo. You did something very special. You were ready when the moment came, and now you're making sure other kids get to be ready too." Amelia smiled. "That's not luck. That's legacy." The office door burst open. Rachel Kim, one of the engineers Christopher had hired, stuck her head in. "Boss, you need to see this. Anthony Wright just posted about us on LinkedIn." Christopher pulled up the post on his phone. Anthony had shared the press conference video with a caption, "3 months ago, I invested in Christopher Allen because I saw hunger and brilliance. Today I'm investing more because I've seen character and leadership. Allen Engineering is proof that the future of this industry belongs to people who care about more than just profit margins. Proud to be part of this journey." The post had already been shared 300 times. Comments flooded in from engineers, developers, investors. Several included inquiries about potential projects. Christopher's phone started ringing constantly. His email inbox exploded. By the end of the day, Allen Engineering had received 15 new project inquiries, 3 interview requests from architecture journals, and a speaking invitation from Christopher's alma mater, QNY. "We're going to need more office space," Rachel said, scrolling through the project requests, "and probably 3 more engineers. Maybe 4. We're 3 months old," Christopher said, feeling overwhelmed. "We're not ready to scale this fast." "Were you ready when you answered David Walker's phone call?" Rachel countered. "Sometimes you grow into the moment instead of waiting until you're ready." That evening, Christopher and Amelia took the subway back to the Bronx together, just like they'd done thousands of times before. But tonight felt different. People looked at Christopher twice, some recognizing him from the press conference. A teenager asked for a selfie. An older woman thanked him for showing these kids they can make it. When they got back to the apartment, there was a package waiting outside the door. No return address, just Christopher's name in elegant handwriting. Inside was a note and a small gift box. The note read, "Christopher, I owe you an apology. At the gala, I treated you like you didn't belong because you threatened my comfortable worldview where people stayed in predictable boxes. Watching you handle adversity with grace while I handled privilege with cruelty taught me something important. Character isn't about where you start. It's about who you become along the way. I'm working on becoming someone better. Thank you for the example. Harper." Inside the box was a fountain pen. Expensive, classic, the kind of thing people used to sign important documents. A note attached said, "For signing contracts that change lives." Christopher showed his mother. She read the note twice, then smiled. People can change. Not everyone does, but the ones who do deserve recognition for it. Should I call her? Eventually. Let her sit with the growth. Real change takes time. She'll know you received it. That's enough for now. That night, Christopher couldn't sleep. He lay in his small bedroom, listening to the familiar sounds of the Bronx, sirens, neighbors, the subway rumbling past 3 blocks away. He thought about Marcus Rodriguez, about the 49 other students who would receive scholarships bearing his name, about Rachel Kim and the other engineers building Allen Engineering into something real, about David Walker, who had given him that first chance, about his mother, who had spent 15 years being invisible so he could be seen. His phone lit up with a text from David. "Couldn't sleep either, I'm guessing. Want to meet for coffee? There's a diner near you that's open late." 20 minutes later, Christopher slid into a booth across from David at a 24-hour diner on Westchester Avenue. The place was nearly empty. Just a few night shift workers grabbing food between jobs. David looked out of place in his expensive casual clothes, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "I wanted to tell you something," David said after they ordered coffee. "Joseph Hall going to prison, Harper starting the foundation, your company succeeding. None of that is why I'm proud of you." "No. I'm proud because you stayed yourself through all of it. You didn't become arrogant with success. You didn't become bitter when you were attacked. You didn't compromise your integrity to fit into a world that wanted you to play by their rules." David stirred his coffee. "You know what the hardest part of success is? Staying human, remembering where you came from, caring about more than your own advancement. Most people lose that. You haven't." "I had a good example," Christopher said, nodding toward Amelia's building a few blocks away. "She taught me that dignity isn't about what you have. It's about how you treat people, especially when you have power over them. She did a remarkable job raising you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking bad diner coffee, watching the occasional car pass outside. "Can I ask you something?" Christopher finally said. "Do you ever regret it? Building the company, sacrificing everything personal for professional success?" David was quiet for a long time. "I regret the cost. Harper's childhood, my marriage, missing so many moments because I was always working." He paused. "But I don't regret the work itself. We've built good buildings, Christopher, structures that will be part of this city for generations. That matters. It's just not the only thing that matters. What would you do differently?" "I'd remember that buildings are built by people, and people aren't resources to be managed. They're individuals with dreams and families and lives that matter more than any project timeline." David smiled. "Which is why I'm glad you're building your company differently, treating people like humans first, employees second. That's how you create something that lasts." Christopher's phone buzzed. An email from Connie confirming the speaking engagement. They wanted him to talk to business students about entrepreneurship and social responsibility. 3 months ago I was working security, Christopher said, showing David the email. Now they want me to teach college students. It's absurd. It's not absurd, it's appropriate. You have something to teach that most professors never learned, that success without purpose is just accumulation, that real wealth is measured in lives changed, not dollars earned. David finished his coffee. So what are you going to tell them? Christopher thought about it, about Marcus Rodriguez and the 49 other scholarship recipients, about his mother finally being seen for the capable professional she'd always been, about Rachel Kim and the other engineers who'd taken risks to join an unknown startup, about the buildings they'd design that would house families, create jobs, become part of communities. I'll tell them what my mother taught me, Christopher said finally, that you can't control where you start, but you can control where you go. That talent without opportunity is wasted, but opportunity without preparation is worthless. That the point of climbing isn't to pull the ladder up behind you, it's to make sure the next person doesn't have to climb as far. David smiled. That's perfect. Tell them that. They left the diner around 2 a.m. David's car service was waiting, but he insisted on walking Christopher to his building first, wanting to see where this remarkable young man had come from. Standing outside the modest brick building with its chipped paint and tired facade, David looked up at the lit windows. This is where it all started. This is where I learned what matters, Christopher corrected. The fancy office in Long Island City is where I work. But this is where I learned how to be human. There's a difference. They shook hands, and David pulled Christopher into an embrace. Keep teaching me that difference. Keep reminding me that the work we do is supposed to serve people, not the other way around. I will. And David, thank you for everything. For the chance, for the trust, for believing I was worth the risk. You were never a risk, Christopher. You were an inevitability. I just happened to be the one who noticed first. David's car pulled away, leaving Christopher standing alone on the sidewalk of his Bronx neighborhood. He looked up at his apartment window, where his mother's light was still on. She was probably reading, waiting for him to come home safely, like she'd done his entire life. He thought about the journey from security guard to CEO, about the phone call that had started it all, about all the small decisions and lucky breaks and hard work that had brought him to this moment. But mostly, he thought about Marcus Rodriguez and the 49 other students who were getting their own phone call moment, their own chance to show what they could do, their own opportunity to prove that talent existed everywhere if someone just bothered to look. Christopher pulled out his phone and sent a text to Rachel. Tomorrow, first thing, I want to start a mentorship program. Allen Engineering will sponsor 10 interns per year from the scholarship program. Paid positions, real work, clear pathway to full-time jobs after graduation. Rachel responded immediately. It's 2 in the morning, but yes, let's do it. Christopher smiled and headed inside, climbing the 3 flights of stairs to the apartment where his mother was waiting with tea and questions about his midnight meeting with David. Tomorrow, he'd wake up and continue building Allen Engineering. He'd design structures that would outlast him. He'd create opportunities for people like Marcus Rodriguez who deserved better than the limitations society tried to impose. But tonight, Christopher Allen sat in his small Bronx apartment with his mother, drinking tea and talking about the future, and felt a contentment that no amount of professional success could replicate. Because at the end of the day, all the contracts and projects and accolades meant nothing if you forgot why you were building in the first place. You built to create, to improve, to lift others as you rose. You built because that phone call 3 months ago wasn't just an opportunity for you. It was a responsibility to everyone who'd never get their own call, to show them it was possible, to prove that the system could change, to be the ladder others could climb. That night, as Christopher drifted off to sleep, his last thought was simple. One phone call had changed his life. Now it was his responsibility to make sure others got their calls too. And he would. One building, one engineer, one student at a time, because that's what legacy really meant, not what you accumulated, but what you gave away. This story teaches us that opportunity rarely announces itself as opportunity. It shows up disguised as chaos, as impossible requests, as moments when everyone expects you to fail. Christopher Allen didn't just answer a phone call. He answered with years of preparation, with knowledge earned in solitude, with character built through struggle. Real success isn't about escaping where you came from, it's about bringing others with you. It's about remembering that every closed door you walk through should be propped open for whoever comes behind you. Amelia Young spent 15 years invisible, but she raised a son who made sure no one else had to stay invisible. David Walker built an empire, but learned that buildings without purpose are just expensive monuments to ego. Harper King discovered that performance is exhausting, but authenticity is powerful. And Joseph Hall, he learned that tearing others down to elevate yourself only works until someone better comes along and builds something real. The next time opportunity calls, will you be ready? Not ready with credentials or connections, but ready with competence and character, because those are the only two things that matter when the moment arrives. Thank you for staying with this story. Subscribe for more narratives that remind us who we're capable of becoming. Share this if you believe in second chances and first opportunities. Comment below what Christopher's journey taught you about your own potential. Remember, you're always one phone call away from everything changing. Make sure you're ready when it rings. See you in the next story.